we need to allow antennas, not unlike Wi-Fi routers, on utility poles. And that's a challenge because, you know, it adds some equipment to telephone poles, requires the installation of equipment on telephone poles or light poles. You may have to replace light poles with taller light poles or telephone poles with taller telephone poles. Or if you don't have telephone poles, you may have to install some kind of, you know, fixture, and that creates some anxiety and some questions. You know, I admire the Arlington County, you know, approach, which is, hey, if there's an existing utility pole or street light, you know, go for it. You know, go for it. You know, go for it.
I strongly believe that radio frequency radiation is a human carcinogen.
If there's an existing utility pole or street light, you know, go for it.
My name is Nicole Williams, and I am a Montgomery County resident who is very concerned about ZTA 1907. The safety issues of 5G are very real. I have been informed that local PEPCO employees have been given the orders by their safety department not to approach 5G antennas while working on power lines. They must first call the company listed on the pole to have it shut off. Employees of telecommunications companies have confirmed my findings that technicians have been injured by 5G antenna radiation. The residents of Montgomery County would not have the same luxury of turning these poles off for any reason. There are members of this county council who seem to think that the only people complaining are privileged whites. Well, I'm here to make sure that they know that notion is false. Often, it is those who are privileged who have the time to dig into the details. Wireless antennas have already been installed on the rooftops of buildings in our county that are predominantly occupied by people of color. And for that very reason, we deserve a public hearing on this bill and the earlier ZTA 1802, allowing all of the community the opportunity to catch up on what they are unknowingly facing. As a Black woman who was not born into privilege, I'm very familiar with being mainly focused on surviving day to day, especially with this pandemic. That's a big reason why you don't, or you haven't heard from many people of color. There are also those who are separating from the system and or are not engaged in our local government in particular. Some are not technologists, and many others are relying on 5G commercials that only glamorize it, practically echoing the tactics of big tobacco. ZTA 1907 provides no assurance that it will bridge the digital divide, nor provide affordable computer access. In this country, there's already a long history of Black, brown, immigrant communities being impacted the most by environmental injustices, and 5G is undoubtedly bringing more of the same. If the county council truly represents us, then they should be informing the community that a cell tower is coming 30 feet from our homes. Government transparency is a big part of a healthy democracy, and we should not be robbed of that. Thank you.
Having just lived through a year where those who denied the science got very sick, I'm shocked that the Fed committee is relying on telecom industry brochures for its information. As a longtime advocate for children's health, I can't sit by and watch the council slow walk our kids into this experiment. Without any escape hatches, by the way. There's no setbacks from schools, and now there's no public hearing process. By now, most of us know that RF radiation is emitted from cell towers and is possibly carcinogenic. The World Health Organization lists it as a class 2B, which means it's as toxic as lead, DEET, and benzene. So putting cell towers just feet from schools and bedroom windows is like deliberately lacing the drinking water with lead, or demanding that these kids pump gas all day. Secondly, the council has no plan to monitor the towers. In the US right now, 8 out of 10 towers are operating out of compliance with FCC maximum permissible exposures. And that's according to the Wall Street Journal. ZTA 1907 makes no provision to close this safety gap, and they never have. In fact, last fall, I had to file a Maryland Public Information Act to obtain all the RF monitoring reports ever done on our school properties. There are 11 towers. So going back to 2007, I got 3 reports and 2 of them were incomplete and useless. So trust me when I say no one's watching these towers. To restate my thesis, ZTA 1907 is very dangerous. It appears to be based on industry sales pitches and makes a lie out of any progressive values or child welfare concerns the council professes to have.
And what's happening is people are getting very ill. They're being driven from their homes. They can't find a place to sleep, to rest. They're breaking down. 5G.
There's a lot of debate in the scientific community whether or not 5G does what you're saying. It should be studied thoroughly. We should have scientific evidence.
We need facts. We need evidence. The American people deserve more from the Federal Communications Commission than they are getting right now. And that's why I'm going to be demanding answers and studies before we see hundreds of thousands, literally more than 300,000 will be necessary at a minimum across the country. It'll be smaller, but the radio frequency will be higher.
Dr. Gunnar Heuser conducted a pilot study on firefighters at a station with cell towers.
And the symptoms included problem with memory, problem with intermittent confusion, problem with weakness.
Heuser says their brain scans suggest even low-level RF can cause cell damage.
The race to 5G is a race America must win, and it's a race, frankly, that our great companies are now involved in. We've given them the incentive they need.
When I came into office, regulations designed for tall towers threatened to strangle our 5G future in red tape. We have eliminated these rules.
If there's an existing utility pole or street light, go for it.
It's all about 5G now.
Construction on the giant cell towers needed to make Los Angeles County's emergency communication system work have been halted until radiation concerns are addressed. The county says the radiation would be no worse than what's given off by cordless phones. Eyewitness News reporter Carlos Granda is live in Altadena with both sides of the story. Carlos?
Well, behind me you can see one of the new towers. It's located at the Altadena Sheriff's Station, and it's right next to Fire Station 11. But firefighters and residents say this was pushed through without public input, and they worry about their health, and they worry about radiation. Dozens of firefighters came to the Board of Supervisors to let them know they don't want cell towers where they work.
The proximity of the towers and people living next to the towers is of grave concern, but it's a very complex issue as to how those radio waves affect people.
Firefighters living and working beneath cell towers like this one have gotten sick. Headaches, extreme fatigue, memory loss, and brain scans show that firefighters exposed to toxic RF radiation experience cell death, ALS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. Now, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors has approved cell tower installations on fire stations in neighborhoods like yours. Call the Board of Supervisors and tell them to stop the cell towers now.
And I am representing Community Vision for Tacoma Park. And we are hoping that at the end of this meeting, people will be outraged. Oversight and accountability in regard to cell towers is currently poor. And if ZTA passes, it will get worse. It will essentially be non-existent. A lot of residents don't understand that our current tower committee has been found to be lax. We found that cell towers are radiating 100 times over FCC legal limits, and yet they have been green lighted and rubber stamped for approval. Yes, there's a letter originated by the Tacoma Park Council asking for tighter oversight for our tower committee, which again is green lighting applications that should not be approved. And ZTA will be something that will mean that we have absolutely no voice, no notification. The little regulations that we have will become non-existent. We need something that's going to give us more teeth, more regulation, more oversight, more input from community, and ZTA does the exact opposite of that.
I'm a school teacher, and I urge you not to pass the cell tower ZTA 1907. We have a right to demand that a commercial product that is being forced on every single Montgomery County resident be beyond question to significantly improve our citizens' lives. And that is not what is happening here. Have you been shown any science that shows that this huge level of cell tower exposure being proposed is safe for our children? On the contrary, we know that there are many long-term studies that show that this cell tower technology exposes our children to possible cancer, leukemia, heart disease, and many other illnesses. We cannot, in good conscience, blanket our communities with this technology. The council is responsible for protecting us from unbridled telecom interest in increasing their profits. We say no to telecoms exposing our children's delicate electrical bodies to more and more radio frequencies. This has to stop. We require the council to limit our exposure until we know more about this long-term effects of this technology.
¿Campo quiere antenas? ¡No! ¿Campo quiere la vida? ¡Sí! ¡No a las antenas! ¡No! ¡No a las antenas! ¡No! ¡No a las antenas! ¡No! El pueblo de Campoy no quiere antenas. El pueblo de Campoy no quiere antenas. El pueblo de Campoy no quiere antenas. ¡Vida sí, antenas no! ¡Vida sí, vida sí! ¡Vida sí, antenas no! ¡Vida sí, antenas no! ¡Vida sí, antenas no! ¡Vida sí, antenas no! ¡Vida sí, antenas no!
Poll that I actually studied the situation on back in 2017 when we got started in this was the cell pole in front of her house. And I figured if we could get an answer to how that poll went up, we could figure out why this dysfunction in the regulatory processes of wireless facilities on cell poles continues. And I'm sorry, Vicki, here I am 4 years later, having told you that we were going to get that pole removed, and it's still there. It's been there now for 10 years. And it has been a continuous process of deflection and finger pointing by various of the government. So let me explain to you how that and why that is. First, a quick introduction. Rick Meyer, the executive director of the Montgomery County Coalition for the Control of Cell Towers. What we started doing back in 2017 was researching these cell poles all over the county and trying to figure out how they got there. Were they compliant with what the Tower Committee, which under our wireless ordinances is supposed to regulate these things? And what we discovered going around the county, I think unfortunately the county records are inconsistent. We think there's less than 100 pole-mounted wireless facilities, cell poles in Montgomery County right now. But what we found out was more than 20% of them were non-compliant with the wireless ordinance. And when we went to the Tower Committee, when we went to the Department of Permitting Services, we were given deflections, we were given non-answers, silence, we were given incredulous reactions like, well, how could they have gotten a permit? And on and on and on. But no one ever would answer our question until very, very recently. In fact, just last week, we finally got an admission on videotape as part of a public information meeting that was being held for strand-mounted facilities, a completely new technology that's being introduced. A member of the Department of Permitting Services, very senior member actually, admitted that there is a two-step, what they call a two-step process right now when it comes to utility poles. And what that process means is that the Department of Permitting Services completely ignores the wireless ordinances, because they found a different ordinance that covers utility poles. And that ordinance says that the utility-owned pole cannot be issued a building permit. So they turn a blind eye to any changes, any modifications, any relocations, including what happened to Vicky Ho 10 years ago. Turn a completely blind eye to actions by the utility company at the request of and the reimbursement of a wireless provider if they make or change or modify or relocate that pole. And as in other words, allows everybody to sidestep any regulation of utility-owned poles. Now, why is that important? Because ZTA 1907 is about to unleash the floodgates. We are expecting hundreds more applications, and I mean hundreds more applications. And we now know that 1907 is a sham because if it's on a utility-owned pole, that first critical step, where they're going to make the pole bigger, where they're going to put it in a different location, where they're going to shove it 42 feet in front of somebody's house or closer than even 30 feet to somebody's house, will not be subject to any regulation by the Department of Permitting Services. It also means it's not subject to any regulations by the Tower Committee or the Office of the Zoning and Hearing Examiner, regardless of what the Tower Committee says. And there have been situations where the Tower Committee has required conditional use hearings. Regardless of all of that, they ignore it. So this dysfunction, which unfortunately the chief sponsor of this bill has chosen to sidestep and ignore as well, is going to continue. And I apologize, Vicki, because in all likelihood, there will be hundreds more, if not more than that, hundreds more residents in Montgomery County that are about to see wireless facilities jammed in close proximity to their houses, and they will be able to do nothing. And this ordinance will do nothing to protect them.
This pole in front of my house, only 32 feet from my children's bedroom, it keep on creating loud buzzing noise during summertime. So the Petco and the Tower Committee, the Crown Castle sent a technician. What do you think they did? They installed a big fan in there, try to cool down the system. So turns out we are not only having the loud buzzing sound during summertime, and also the loud fan noise. So you can imagine if they install the 5G, which is a millimeter wave, which will use much more higher energy, and the buzzing sound and the fan and everything, it caused the noise pollution to all the neighborhoods.
Vicki, be sure to remind them that it's 68 feet tall. The pole that was there originally was 25 feet. Yes. So they put 40 more feet. If you drive to see this pole, you can see it a half mile from her house. ZTA 1907 will only allow people that are 300 feet to any pole to have any say if there's any objection to be raised under certain circumstances. You can see her pole from a half mile on her road. 68 volt. It dwarfs everything on that road. It's higher and taller than the surrounding distribution lines where it was supposed to have been. And it's absolutely incredulous when you see it. And by the way, it's not the tallest in your neighborhood, unfortunately, but it is certainly the most obvious because of the layout on the road.
Amelia and her little sister and I are just 3 of the 14 people who were injured when a 115-foot Verizon cell tower went up in our 35-foot height restricted neighborhood last year. One day, my youngest daughter, who had just turned 10, came downstairs complaining that she was headachy, dizzy, and her head felt buzzy. When I called Verizon, they confirmed that that was the day they fired up the tower. My children have experienced headaches, dizziness, nausea, insomnia, skin rashes to the point where they have missed school. They can no longer sleep in their own rooms, and now they have been forced to leave their home and sleep on mattresses on the floor elsewhere at night to help alleviate the symptoms from the constant 24/7 exposure of a Class 2B carcinogen and environmental toxin that they've been forced to endure. Our doctors shared with us the American Academy of Pediatrics position statement on cell towers, with studies confirming that living near them increased the risk for all these symptoms, including cancer.
Our headaches and nausea and dizziness don't stop on nights and weekends and special occasions. You can't turn a cell tower off or put it on airplane mode when you're feeling sick. We can't live in our home anymore. Our neighbors have moved because they have 2 young kids and their family has symptoms too. Some neighbors spent all their money sleeping in hotels, and when it ran out, they are now sleeping in their car away from the tower. Another neighbor has a stage 3 glioblastoma brain tumor, which was in remission, and now she is battling cancer again. No one should be forced to live like this. People get sick from cell towers all the time. We are not invisible. We've met so many others harmed by wireless radiation exposure they did not consent to. No one should have to be forced to move. No one should have to choose between their homes or their health like our neighbors and I have been forced to.
This cell phone emits the waves, while this one receives the waves. At the same time, I have a device that records the sound that the colony makes in the beehive. This is why it is connected to a microphone placed under the beehive. Look at the waveform there. The thicker it is, the greater the intensity of the sound. When the phones are active, the colony is disturbed, and as soon as the phone's turned off, the colony reverts to its normal noise.
My name is Marion Eady. I'm the founder of the League of Conservation Voters. Not long ago, you passed a resolution declaring we face a climate emergency. If you really mean that, you should not pass this zoning text amendment in the form that it has today. We can build plenty more cell towers in Montgomery County. The industry wants this, to rush this through, to blanket our neighborhoods with cell phone towers so they can abandon their wired and fiber optic networks. They would rather lay off those maintenance workers and let our energy consumption skyrocket. A study reported in the Institute of Electronic and Electronics Engineers said, quote, wireless technologies will continue to consume at least 10 times more power than wired technologies when providing comparable access rates and traffic volumes. That's a bigger deal than it seems, because a snapshot of today is not a good guide to tomorrow on energy consumption. Demand from all internet devices is increasing by 20% every year. We face a tsunami of data. Internet of Things, robots, surveillance, driving cars, live streaming videos, and ever more trivial applications offered by an industry eager to create new products and market. A study by Swedish energy expert Anders André concluded the communications technology could consume about 20% of all electricity by 2025 and be responsible for 14% of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. We owe it to the climate to make data transmission as efficient as we possibly can. This zoning text amendment takes us in the opposite direction. if it enables the abandonment of much more efficient wired connections, which is why the Sierra Club has urged you to hold off on passing any ordinance like this until you have thoroughly assessed its energy implications. These cell phone towers will threaten pollinators and migratory birds which use the Earth's electromagnetic fields for orientation and navigation. We all know bees are in dire trouble. Many studies suggest that EMFs are part of that problem. If you put a cell phone near a hive, the bees abandon it. I now have a yard humming with life from a hive and many native plants. If you put a cell phone next to my house, my yard will become a dead place. I know you're afraid of federal preemption, but that is not an excuse to roll over and play dead. The feds can preempt a moratorium, but we are only asking for reasonable zoning requirements and for you to work with us to reduce our risk. If you get sued, at least we will know you tried, and you can buy us valuable time. If you roll over and play dead, that tells us you are not really working for us, the citizens. You're working for the telecom industry.
Ms. Eady, I appreciate your tremendous career and working to found LCV, and I would urge you to look up Montgomery County v. FCC. It's when we sued the FCC over their attempts to preempt us on telecom infrastructure.
I think that's great, but where the rubber meets the road is what kind of legislation you pass now and whether you rush it through or you do it right.
The second issue is tree trimming. We cannot afford to be damaging our trees. There's published research that is showing damage to trees from the radio frequency radiation.
Today I have absolutely no remaining doubt that weak technical electromagnetic fields are able to cause harm to living organisms. Spatially inhomogeneous high-frequency field distributions cause spatially inhomogeneous tree damage.
But also, if the poles are going to be going up 6 to 15 feet, there inevitably is going to be trimming that's going to happen. Yet the ZTA has no protections or accountability in terms of the impact to street trees and the canopy, who's going to be trimming, where is the oversight, where is the enforcement. The Sierra Club of Washington, D.C. testified to the D.C. Council a couple years ago calling for protections for D.C. trees.
DDOT's draft small cell design guidelines state that trees shall not be removed or have their critical root zones damaged for the installation of small cell infrastructure. It's a good thing that DDOT has thought about the effect that this small cell technology will have on the trees of D.C. However, deeper consideration of the issue is needed. Specifically, the District of Columbia must ensure that street trees are not aggressively pruned as D.C. moves towards small cell infrastructure. This technology requires a direct line of sight between small cells. That could require chopping off large portions of tree branches, which could kill some of the district's largest and most majestic trees. Trees do not flourish with aggressive pruning. When they die, it takes decades to grow new trees the size of the large canopy trees that have been lost. That's not worth a slightly faster game of Angry Birds or a faster download of the latest Ariana Grande song. That's not to say expanding small cell technology isn't important. Like nearly everyone else in this room, I use my smartphone a lot, probably too much. I understand the need for faster data on wireless devices, but that should not come at a cost of damaging our tree canopy, which is just beginning to recover after decades of neglect. The Sierra Club requests that before the deployment of small cell technology, the district undertake a study of how this infrastructure will affect DC's trees. We ask that the DC government develop a plan to ensure maximum protection of our trees and our tree canopy, not just making sure trees aren't cut down and protecting the roots, but also protecting tree branches from heavy pruning. We cannot and should not try to prevent the advancement of 5G technology in the district, but we must ensure that our trees and our tree canopy are protected for future generations, for your granddaughter, for millions of others, and for the future of the climate.
And there needs to be an environmental impact assessment that considers trees, as well as impacts to pollinators and wildlife. The FCC limits were not developed, those are the radiation limits from the cell towers, where they weren't developed to protect our flora or fauna or wildlife. There is no US or international authority that has expertise in science, biology, or safety that has ever acted to review the current body of research and develop safety limits for our wildlife. And that is part of our lawsuit, Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC, that we are awaiting a court ruling on. So there's also extensive research in the published literature, and most recently, a 2021 review by former U.S. Fish and Wildlife biologist lead on cell tower impacts, Dr. Albert Manville, and other experts, which reviewed the science on impacts to wildlife. And I quote, ecological effects have been seen broadly on orientation, migration, food finding, and all of that is in published research, which I'll put in the chat while you put in your questions. So there is a lot that is missing from this ZTA to protect the community, to protect the environment, to protect Montgomery County. This ZTA cuts the community out of participating in the decision-making process in regards to cell antennas in front of homes. And we're going to talk about two additional points which is bringing people together to want to halt this ZTA, and that is property values and environmental impacts in trees. So many residents are asking and have asked in other hearings that have been on this matter, and there has not been a public hearing since 2019. The community is asking for a public hearing, however, there is none scheduled, asking, will we be reimbursed for the property loss from a cell pole in front of their home? I mean, how will the thousands of cell towers that are anticipated impact the county financially in terms of the drop in home values of those specific homes? Because if you can choose a house with a pole in front of it or a house a few doors down, which would you choose? And research shows that there's up to a 20% drop when there is a cell tower visible from a home. Montgomery County's own legal filings state in regards to small cells that are party to an ex parte that says the addition of facilities of this size diminish property values.
Lots of concerns coming from the broader community. Most of them are around the impact of 5G on human health and the environment. I think, you know, people are very aware of the dangers associated with radiation or wireless radiation. And as wireless technology increases, then it's something that as a community or as communities, we all need to be very conscientious about how we integrate this technology into our lives. One of the major concerns is that whilst we're able to, I guess, determine the extent to which we use wireless technology in our homes at the moment, our understanding of the way that 5G is being deployed around the world would mean that all of a sudden, our entire community in a space like Bermuda that's only 22 miles long would be exposed to wireless radiation without having a choice or a say in it. The implementation of the infrastructure just means that all of a sudden you have antennas in close proximity to residential areas, to restrooms, to schools, to business areas and things of that nature. So all of us would be exposed to it. And that's a genuine concern, especially when you have a community that is unaware of the potential risks to their own health and to the environment. And there are advocates in the community around the impact on birds and bees and tree canopy and things of that nature.
Dozens of firefighters came to the Board of Supervisors to let them know they don't want cell towers where they work.
The proximity of the towers and people living next to the towers is of grave concern, but it's a very complex issue as to how those radio waves affect people all the way up to 3 miles away.
The towers are going up at fire stations and sheriff stations, part of a new high-tech communication system to help first responders talk with each other.
President of the LA County Firefighters Union, Local 1014, but more importantly, realize I'm also a 25-year veteran fire captain. I've been a paramedic and engineer. I work at Fire Station 16, where outside of my kitchen window I can now throw a stone to a 70-foot tower that is closer to the 2-story apartment building with some of the low-income kids that we mentor at our station who've not had a voice in this. And I stand allied with not only the residents that we serve at my fire station, but with community members who are here today, and I want to cut to it. I have never felt like going out and buying a pack of cigarettes more than right now and getting my smoke on, because everything's going to just be okay, isn't it? There is no scientific data correlating smoking of cigarettes and cancer. Wait, there is no scientific data correlating cancer and firefighters going into smoke-filled environments. I've been through Senate and Assembly hearings making testimony to this fact, only to hear things like that brought up like we heard here today. It's ridiculous. This is a 20-year-old standard they're recurringly going back to, which is not even a safety standard. There's no health and safety people involved in this FCC standard. It's 20 years old, people. It's time to get current.
I want to be clear once again that UFLAC supports Local 1014, opposes the LA RICS putting poles up where we live and spend one.
Because in 2004, I organized a brain study of firefighters in Central California who had been sick from the day the tower in front of their station was activated. We found brain damage in all 6 men we did SPECT brain scans on. And as a result, there have been policy changes. The firefighters, when SB 649, the small cell bill in California, was first enacted, the firefighters spent over $1 million trying to get 5G antennas off their stations. So would you please give them what San Diego County gave them? That's a 300-foot setback, because people are going to get sick. And when your firefighters are sick, your community is less safe. Your community is at risk. They are your first responders.
I've had 3 presidential appointments and several others in the general environmental area, 2 of them in the White House. I've also been an environmental law professor at the major UC law schools. This bill takes away the power of cities to decide things that were granted to them by the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution gives the police power to the states. The state constitution has given it to the cities. Your legislation, which would take away the power of decision from cities and give it to a private corporation, in effect, is an attempt to change the California Constitution by legislation, and that's not going to get very far, and it's an extremely unwise step to try to do. The bill has the effect of destroying the value of property. You can imagine what happens when one of these WTFs get put up in front of your house or your neighbor's house, and or in your cities, in your parks. The power of a city to control itself, to use the police power to control health and welfare effects of these WTF towers is not going to be easily challenged by this legislation. It will lead to an enormous amount of litigation, most of it predictably unsuccessful. It will lead to enormous expenses by the cities and the counties because they are not going to be able to get insurance. And as the insurance industry has said quite clearly, that they will not insure any installation radiating EMF.
Scientists from 42 countries are now warning their governments about the emerging health problems associated with wireless radiation, and Canadian doctors and scientists have added their voices.
The most prevalent symptoms include headache, fatigue, decreased ability to concentrate, tinnitus, irritability, and insomnia. Impacts on the heart and the nervous system are also of great concern.
At lower frequency, scientists are predicting damage to eyes, loss of insect populations which are already declining, antibiotic resistance in bacteria, and physiological effects on the nervous system and on the immune system.
Radiation from radio frequencies is classed in the same category of carcinogens as lead.
It's 10,
One advisor to the World Health Organization said there's enough evidence that if they were to re-evaluate radiofrequency radiation,
it would be placed in class 1, i.e. a human carcinogen, and governments could not possibly.
Hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers have been published demonstrating harm to humans and the environment. This evidence includes increase in cancer, sperm damage, reproductive harms, memory and learning deficits, especially in children, and damage to our DNA, nervous systems, and the cells in our bodies. Unfortunately, Health Canada and the FCC are stuck in the 1920 science that states tissue must be heated to be harmed. The last update from Health Canada of our safety guidelines was deeply flawed. 5G has all the issues associated with 2, 3, and 4G, plus some additional concerns. Because of the technology limits, 5G will require significantly more antennas, and they will be significantly closer to our homes, schools, and places of work. We have one instance where a small cell antenna has been installed 20 meters from a child's bedroom.
Peer-reviewed studies report significant biologic effects, including 118 of 173 common assay studies that found DNA damage from EMF exposure. The $30 million National Toxicology Program study referred to by Deborah Davis earlier clearly found clear evidence of increased cancer incidence in male rats exposed to cell phone radiation, and this effect was confirmed by the Ramazzini Institute in Italy using a much lower exposure. A substantial body of peer-reviewed epidemiologic research indicates that EMF exposure, including extremely low-frequency magnetic fields and radio-frequency radiation, increases the risk of cancer, reproductive harm, and neurological disorders in humans. Moreover, children seem to be more vulnerable to EMF than adults. The International Agency for Research on Cancer is classified as possibly carcinogenic to humans, Group 2B, low-frequency magnetic fields in 2001 and radio-frequency radiation in 2011. The IARC has prioritized radio-frequency radiation for re-review and will most likely upgrade this classification. More than 250 scientists who published over 2,000 papers on electromagnetic fields and biology or health have signed the International EMF Scientist Appeal, which calls for stronger EMF exposure limits because governmental safety guidelines were not designed to protect us from chronic exposure to low-intensity electromagnetic fields. It has been 2 decades since EPA has done any research on the effects of EMF, and 4 decades since the EPA monitored radio-frequency radiation in the U.S. There are now 800,000 cell towers and 2 million cell antennas, and 800,000 more cell towers will be installed in the next few years for 5G, the 5th generation of cellular technology. To protect public and environmental health from this hazardous pollutant, I strongly recommend that the EPA reinstitute its EMF research program and adopt routine environmental exposure assessments. Moreover, and finally, the EPA should conduct quantitative risk assessments and recommend safe exposure limits that protect humans and other species from harm due to EMF exposure.
So there really is no research ongoing. We're kind of flying blind here, so far as health and safety is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What happens when thousands of these cells begin appearing near schools, community centers, homes, and workplaces? And what happens to the workers who are up there repairing them? What happens to the folks who are walking by them every day, school children? And the younger the children, the more susceptible to the radio frequencies they may be.
Across the United States, there are numerous actions happening at the local level. There are council resolutions to halt 5G at Keene, New Hampshire, Hawaii County, Hawaii, Easton, Connecticut, Farragut City, Tennessee. There are resolutions regarding the health and environmental effects of 5G from Hillendale Beach, Florida, Coconut Creek, Florida, Carmel City, Indiana. They're calling for a review of the research before we deploy this technology onto people and the environment. And there are many resolutions calling for changes to federal law so cities can control 5G, such as in New Jersey City, New Jersey, and Oak Brook, Illinois. These are only a few examples. There are many cities that are passing ordinances to restrict and control 5G small cells. They include Los Altos, Petaluma, Mill Valley, Malibu, Santa Barbara, Nevada City, Calabasas, San Clemente, Westlake, Sonoma, Sebastopol, San Rafael, Ross Valley, Encinitas, Fairfax, Palo Alto, Walnut City, and San Diego County, California. Copake, New York, Warren, Connecticut, Lavallette, Florida, and Mason, Ohio. Each city has its own unique ordinance meant to allow the people to be part of the decision-making process. In Los Altos, California, for example, their ordinance says that the installation of small cells on public utility easements in residential neighborhoods is prohibited. A small cell is a shorter cell tower with 5G and 4G antennas on it. There's a 500-foot separation from schools. There's a 1,500-foot separation between nodes, between the antenna facilities. Many cities have a specific amount of feet that a cell tower or small cell 5G wireless base station must be from a school or home. So for example, in Calabasas, it's 1,000 feet, Petaluma, 500 feet, San Ramon, 300 feet. Walnut, California, and Hampstead, New York have a 1,500-foot setback for cell towers from homes. Palo Alto, California, and Bar Harbor, Maine, as well as Salisaw, Oklahoma, have 1,500 feet setbacks from schools. Stop 5G International has video footage from the protests in Berkeley, California, where people have been protesting cell towers, and there have been arrests and many other actions going on in the city.
I'm representing the veterans in New Orleans. In 1977, I was in the Army. I was stationed at Fort Huachuca, and we were testing microwaves mounted on Huey aircrafts to be flown at an altitude of 100 feet over the ground for the purpose of defoliation, basically like Agent Orange was, but we were using microwaves. What we found out was these microwaves, which were on frequencies between 140 and 300 gigahertz, not only affected the plant life, but it also affected the animals and the insects where they've tested the 5G systems. So even if you say the microwave from the small cells is not going to affect humans, what about the rest of the world? What about the insects, the birds, all of ecology? There's that's all I have to say. I'm just worried about the entire world. I mean, if we have no insects, we have no birds, we have no bees, where are we going with this? I mean, how are we going to feed ourselves? How are we going to sustain our own health, our own lives, if we microwave everything in the world? Another thing, the FCC's guideline for small cells, it clearly says that these small cell antennas should be placed in a further distance from schools and public buildings. Why are they saying they should be put that far away? There must be some kind of safety issue there that they're not telling us about.
Firefighters living and working beneath cell towers like this one have gotten sick. Headaches, extreme fatigue, memory loss, and brain scans show that firefighters exposed to toxic RF radiation experience cell death, ALS, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. Now, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors has approved cell tower installations on fire stations in neighborhoods like yours. Call the Board of Supervisors and tell them to stop the cell towers now.
Recently, an international consortium of epidemiologists issued a strong statement urging epidemiologists to avoid conflict of interest and to declare when they have been sponsored by industry for their research. And they are deeply concerned about the growing conflicts of interest that are characterizing groups such as the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, which is a self-appointed, self-monitored group of a small number of people that report to no government and has no independent oversight. These are examples where we've got to do a better job of declaring where people are coming from so that the citizens who look at this information will understand that there are conflicts of interest that have underpinned a lot of the advice, particularly those that tell us, don't worry, everything is fine. When it comes to independent review, you have to look at what Environmental Health Trust has to say. You have to look at the work of Leonard Hardell and Joel Moskowitz and many others, because if you want to know what's going on, you must ask, where did the person come from? Who bought their chair? Where do they stand? Because often where a person stands on an issue depends on where they sit and who paid for the things they're sitting on. And that is something that we have to do a better job of understanding more broadly.
So even with full on 5G deployment in all of these communities, right? The very people that can't afford the internet today are going to be those same people that aren't going to be able to afford 5G down the road.
A hunger strike to stop 5G and to stop the Italian government from loosening their wireless radiation limits has been launched. Italy, along with countries such as China, India, Russia, and Switzerland, have far more restrictive wireless radiation limits compared to, say, the United States or Australia or Japan. However, industry has been aggressively and with billions of dollars marketing 5G and lobbying countries to change their more restrictive cell phone, cell tower radiation limits in order to fully deploy 5G and 4G.
Vodafone Giga Network was born to unite. Every day we work to make it more reliable and powerful. Because even when we can't be close, we can be together.
Members of Parliament have been speaking out during the session, and I'm going to play you a clip.
Cari colleghi, con l'approvazione dei pareri al PNRR avete ancora una volta tradito la promessa fatta al popolo italiano di tutelare veramente la nostra salute, favorendo il governo nel suo intento di innalzare di 10 volte i limiti delle emissioni elettromagnetiche, dall'attuale 6 volt metro fino a 61 volt metro, per irradiarci tutti sempre ovunque in maniera massiccia. Continuate ad offendere le preoccupazioni di oltre 600 sindaci contrari alla sperimentazione 5G e a oltraggiare quest'Aula che l'8 ottobre 2019 aveva votato per prevenire e ridurre l'inquinamento elettromagnetico. E quindi per prevenire e ridurre l'inquinamento elettromagnetico avete ben deciso di innalzare furbescamente i limiti. Complimenti! L'ordine arriva direttamente dall'ICNIRP, giudicato dai tribunali italiani in grave conflitto di interesse vicino alla Telco, che ignora gli effetti cronici e biologici gravi ampiamente documentati, mentre la Commissione europea e la IARC stanno rivalutando la cancerogenesi e la nocività delle radiofrequenze. Alleanza Italiana Stop 5G inizia oggi una catena solidale di sciopero della fame e staffetta alla quale aderisco, come civile protesta dei cittadini ostaggiati dalle vostre scellerate scelte antiscientifiche votate al sacrificio della vita umana.
Italy has a very strong movement to stop 5G, and over 600 cities in Italy have passed resolutions to halt 5G until safety research has been completed.
L'iniziativa è partita ieri, il 13 di aprile. Ad oggi contiamo 75 aderenti su scala nazionale, sciopero della fame vero e proprio per mandare un segnale forte oltre che agli organi di informazione, ma soprattutto al Parlamento e al governo italiano, nella misura in cui recentemente la Commissione Poste e Telecomunicazioni ha approvato praticamente di voler innalzare di ben 10 volte il limite soglia di radiazione elettromagnetica, portando dall'attuale media dei 6 volt metro fino a un picco massimo di 61 volt metro. Questo per favorire il 5G, questo per favorire l'installazione di 1 milione di nuove antenne via terra.
Ciao, sono Laura. Aderisco allo sciopero della fame contro l'innalzamento dei limiti delle emissioni elettromagnetiche, perché sono una cittadina consapevole e perché sono una madre consapevole. La mia intenzione è quella di proteggere i miei figli e di proteggere le generazioni future e anche le generazioni presenti, qui e ora.
Stop 5G, stop 5G, stop. 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 Sai che danneggia i tessuti biologici, dovremmo solo essere un filo un po' più logici.
The well-respected Ramazzini Institute is based in Italy, and their research on rats found the same types of tumors in their studies that looked at levels of exposure that were comparable to cell tower or base station radiation, as was found in the US National Toxicology Program's $30 million study on rats, which also found brain tumors and tumors of the nerve sheath of the heart. Here's a short clip of Dr. Fiorella Belpoghi discussing those findings.
So what we found, so it was astonishing me, because I have to tell you the pure truth. We were in our lab and I was peer reviewing, that is my work, I am chief of pathology. I was peer reviewing the slides that my younger pathologists were bringing to me, and I started to see 1, 2, 3 of this uncommon tumor of the heart. Really very, very rare in our strain. And this tumor of the heart are not of the muscle of the heart, but they are of the nervous cell that cover the internal part of the heart and transmit the signal to have the contraction. And the heart had also hyperplasia of this cell. We both observed the same results in the US and in my institute. It happened that in 2016, the National Toxicology Program made a press conference announcing that they have seen this strange tumor. I called on my staff and I told, My dear, we have trouble. There is a problem, a very strong problem, because I have seen that our rats in the first group, the high dose group, because we start from control group and then we continue with the other doses from the bigger to the lower, I have seen 3 of these tumors in 2 weeks in 120 animals. So it seems to me that it's too much to be regular. And we asked to the National Toxicology Program we finish all the review of all heart and all brain. So our study is not completed up to now. It is regarding only brain and heart that were the same tumors that they have observed, but it is the nervous system. So I asked her, please help me. I can't have the responsibility to bring at the attention of the world these results alone as Ramazzini Institute. We are 30 at the National Institute of Environmental Science, are 4,000. So you understand that is a big difference. And I went in the US with my luggage with all the slides. We had a second opinion review of all slides, and 11 pathologists, the same that analyzed the slide of the National Toxicology Program, confirmed. And also some of the lesions were over-evaluated, that were hyperplasia to me, and they said, no, it is a tumor. So the results were published, and the publication is now available. This is the kind of tumor, as you see, is a very strange one. This is the heart of a rat, an American rat. So this is the pattern that they observed. This is an Italian rat, and we also performed a specific staining that make colors only for this kind of cell, that is the S100, and all our cases were positive for this staining.
I was honored to speak during the 3-day marathon in Italy, and as well, Dr. Deborah Davis of Environmental Health Trust spoke about the science on 5G and on wireless radiation.
An important study on 5G millimeter wave deployment for networks has been published in a technical journal of electrical engineers, an IEEE journal. And what these researchers did was take the current network in Austin, Texas, and show what the current exposures are from the towers that exist that are connecting 4G devices. You can see that in this image here. The next image shows you the dramatic increase in radiation that will take place if and when 5G is fully implemented in Austin, Texas. The researchers, who are themselves electrical engineers, say that the 5G mobile networks cannot yet be classified as safe because the exposures that are involved have the potential to harm the public. We at Environmental Health Trust are calling for a halt in the rollout of the 5G network, a moratorium, and we have proposed making wired connections to and through the premises as a way to avoid microwave wireless radiation throughout the urban environment, which is projected now. And as these engineers have concluded, this would result in levels that cannot be deemed safe.
The Environmental Health Trust tracks not only the science, but also the different policies around the world. And you can go to our website at ehtrust.org to learn more about the over a dozen countries which have laws in place where they educate the community and families and people about wireless radiation and how to reduce exposure. And as well, they have policies in place to reduce exposure in schools, in communities, or many, like Italy, have much lower thresholds for allowable levels of cell tower radiation in communities. So when you step outside your door, what is the level of radiation that you are exposed to? Well, the limits of how much you can be exposed to differ depending on what country you're in. Numerous countries have cell tower network radio frequency radiation limits far more stringent than ICNIRP or the US FCC. Many governments measure and publish the levels of radio frequency radiation from cell tower base station networks online in a public place, such as a map online, or for example, if you are in France and you want to know what is the level of radio frequency radiation right outside the front door of my home, you go to your mayor, and because of a 2015 law, the mayor can get those measurements for you if they have not already been done. Countries which are compiling data, measuring the radio frequency radiation in communities, and posting that data include France, Spain, Austria, Greece, Turkey, India, Israel, Gibraltar, Belgium, Brussels, Switzerland, Bulgaria, Tunisia, Brazil, Malta, Bahrain, Hungary, Monaco, and French Polynesia. There are resolutions to halt 5G in numerous European cities, from the United Kingdom to France to Cyprus to Ireland to the 600 municipalities in Italy. In the United States, there are several cities that have passed resolutions to halt 5G. Hawaii County, Eastern Connecticut, Farragut, Tennessee, and most recently, Coconut Creek, Florida, adopted a resolution on 5G and radio frequency radiation. Hundreds of doctors are signing on to appeals to halt 5G, and that is because of the scientific evidence which exists, which is published, which shows adverse effects from levels of wireless, cell tower, cell phone radiation, which we are exposed to legally. The permissible levels for wireless radiation that many governments have adopted are simply not protective. They do not ensure our safety. And that is why Environmental Health Trust and scientists and doctors around the world are taking action on this issue to elevate the discussion, to showcase the scientific evidence, and to ensure that we have more protective policies in place to protect the public and to protect the future. Environmental Health Trust launched a historic lawsuit against the United States FCC regarding this issue. We are calling out the US government on their lack of full review of the scientific literature related to cell phone and wireless radiation. You can learn more about that on our website at ehtrust.org. Thank you so much for your support of Environmental Health Trust.
In the 1930s, they said asbestos was safe. In the 1950s, they said tobacco was safe. In the 1960s, they said DDT was safe. From the 2000s, they say cell phones are safe. Today, they say 5G is safe.
"5G is potentially much more dangerous, and it needs to be tested."
It will be everywhere.
Many people believe that our phones are dangerous, right? They believe that these things give you cancer. I think most of us have made a decision in our daily lives that we're going to continue to use phones.
Mothers who spent a lot of time on the cell phone, carried a cell phone with them during their pregnancies, had a higher risk of having children with behavioral problems. And I think when you have clear cause and effect relationship in mice and an association in women, that women who use these cell phones had children with more behavioral problems, I think that's together very powerful evidence saying that this is truly a cause and effect in humans as well. The mouse studies prove that it's really causative, that the cell phones are causing it. It's not just because of some other behaviors linked to cell phones in women.
The WHO review of existing research decided to place a 2B risk on mobile phones, roughly equivalent to inhaling benzene fumes or handling rock wool. When using a phone next to your ear, you directly expose your skull and its interior to what seems to be a trigger on biological effects on brain cells. The WHO's 31 specialists from 14 countries say risks can be lowered by using hands-free kits with headphones.
Talk about radio frequency electromagnetic fields, and it has been shown for these that there is altered cerebral blood flow. There's some other effects, also including some altered effects on the DNA.
I think most of us have made a decision in our daily lives that we're going to continue to use phones.
Industry has not said once that cell phones are safe.
I think most of us have made a decision in our daily lives that we're going to continue to use phones.
What's happened now that is mind-blowing is that the FCC, when it made its determination that they didn't need to update their limits, which is why we have our lawsuit against them, but now they have made a new proposed rule about the higher frequencies for 5G. And also for lower frequencies, they've made new, I don't want to call them safety standards because they're not really safety standards, but they're being used as safety standards for a whole swatches of new frequencies, much lower than wireless and higher into the millimeter wave. And they're saying that the only thing to worry about is heat, because that's been proven because of their determination in 2019. The city of Boston, Massachusetts wrote to the FCC regarding the FCC's frequencies, 5G frequencies, asking the commission to examine the impact on health of the low-level multiple exposures. There have been for years now elected officials sending letters to the FCC asking for 5G safety data. If you don't know about the New Hampshire Commission report on 5G health and environment, really important to know what they did. They issued a final report after 1 year of investigation. Their commissioners had members of the House of Representatives and Senate, engineers and experts. They had presentations by expert scientists and the National Institutes of Health, and they issued 15 recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they are recommendations to the state to protect the public and the environment and reduce exposure. Starting with something we need well, you would think we would need before we roll anything out, that the state, or in our situation, I'm going to take it to Montgomery County, should be measuring the radio frequency radiation levels and post maps of the radio frequency levels for the public. They also are calling to require that 5G structures be labeled for radio frequency radiation at eye level and readable from 9 feet away. Now, France is kind of sort of doing this to a degree in that they just started. These are their radiation measurement sites in France. And actually, many countries, but not the United States, measure and publish radio frequency radiation levels online. Some do real-time measurements. Some of these measurements I can't say are quite adequate. Some are in better positions than others. Sometimes the websites don't work. Some have these real-time monitors near schools and other locations, but not Montgomery County or the United States. They recommend an independent study of 5G health effects and that the FCC should do an environmental assessment on the impact of 5G. That federal agencies be engaged with ecological knowledge to develop radio frequency limits that protect trees, plants, birds, insects, and pollinators. And I hope, if I haven't, I might not have been clear, that the limits that we have in the United States were not set to protect the environment, but only to avoid heating. But they're really aimed at humans. They're inadequate to protect humans, but they have nothing to do with trees or plants or wildlife. They were never developed for impacts to the environment. This is a serious gap in accountability. There is a letter from the EPA to myself where this was confirmed. When I asked several questions, but I just put a couple in here. I asked who's researched birds and bees. The EPA responded they don't have a funded mandate. When I asked about research on damage to memory and other things, they referred me to a 1984 document called The Biological Effects of Radiofrequency Radiation from 1984. And there's no one watching the store on this issue. There's no one in the federal government that is mandated to look at the research that continues to be published every week, indicating that wireless radiation is not safe, and if 5G is going to increase it, we are looking at unprecedented levels of this radiation, and that's why so many scientists are concerned.
We're not making this up, and I want to be very clear. Industry has not said once that cell phones are safe. The federal government, the various interagency working groups have all said it's safe.
There's only been 10 or 12 years of exposure to these agents, and it's increasing dramatically. And there have been some hints recently that there is an increase in brain cancers in people who have used these cellular communication devices for a number of years.
What are the considerations with respect to an additional potential risk for children using cell phones?
Children have a configuration of their skull that does allow penetration of cell phone radiation deeper.
Are you saying there's a potentially greater risk?
I'm saying there potentially is a greater risk. And
what limitations, if any, then, if any parents are watching this on C-SPAN, what should they do?
I wish I had a good answer to that. I think
Well, would there be a precautionary approach? How about the use of earphones to minimize risk?
I think that's a good idea.
Industry has not said once that cell phones are safe.